So I recently read an interesting blog post on someone who was comparing the economy of the north of the UK versus the Netherlands. So obviously, as a Dutch expat who's been living in the north of the UK for quite a while now, I thought it would be interesting to have a look at that. But besides the economy, I'll also talk about some other general things that are related to this based on my own experience. So first of all, why would you even compare them? So generally you would see that the population in the Netherlands is quite similar versus the north of the UK. And both of them have regions which are very densely populated. So in the Netherlands we would generally talk about the Randstad then, where we have around 8 million people. And in the UK we have the Northern Powerhouse, which are the regions around Manchester and Leeds and Sheffield. One of the myths to bust as Dutch, obviously you should know that Holland and the Netherlands are not exactly the same. And a lot of people also think that the Randstad and Holland are exactly the same. So the Randstad is roughly made up from 4 different provinces in the western part of the country. Whereas in the Netherlands in total you have 12 provinces and only 2 of them, so North and South Holland, actually form part of Holland. So now we talked about the similarities, which are mainly related to the population and the density. Let's look at some things that are very, very different. So generally there's more people in employment in the Netherlands, but not enough to make up for the big difference that you're going to see. So the economy of the Netherlands is at least 50% larger. The public sector spending, but also the private spending on research is at least twice as high in the Netherlands versus the north of the UK. So the income generally is much higher in the Netherlands as well. And here you have to consider that in the north of the England, this is somewhat boosted by also the income that we have in the southeast of England. But funnily enough, the length of the railways is just the same in the north of England versus the Netherlands. What's very different, however, that in the Netherlands twice as much is electrified. So that means they're much larger, much faster, and more importantly, if you've ever been on a UK train, much more reliable trains going between cities in the Netherlands. So you also have to imagine that the UK being an island, the north of the Netherlands is very well connected to the rest of Europe. So you have lots of international trains going in and out. Think of the Eurostar, for instance. And then there's the cycling and the walking network. So generally, obviously in the UK, we don't have the same cycling network. So that's the other interesting point made in the blog post is that they looked at the regional inequality of GDP in the Netherlands versus the north of England. So in the north of England, you will see that generally, except for Cheshire, which is far above this, they're all kind of equally bad, so to speak. They're all on the lower end of the spectrum, but they're almost roughly the same. So in the Netherlands, you will see this is much more spread out. So you will see a big difference between the regions which are in the Randstad, so the north of Holland, versus regions that are outside of this, such as for instance Friesland and Groningen. However, it's worth noting that if you compare this to other regions in the north of England, Friesland would be still one of the better performing ones, just if you look at GDP. So generally, Dutch cities will be similar in terms of size and number of people living there compared to the UK. But we've mentioned before, like it was interesting seeing that the transport network was completely different. So, but what you do see is that there's better housing, there's lower absolute poverty, generally greater prosperity, and there's much more connection between the cities. And the cities in the north of England do tend to be much more isolated because of better public transport. It's much easier to get around in the Netherlands. Part of it is also it's obviously a flat country, so I do notice that I can imagine that it's much easier first of all in terms of cycling, but also in terms of building of the railways. And the interesting point made in this blog post, why, when they started out relatively the same, why the Dutch economy has outperformed the north of England? Well, there's lots of different reasons that were brought up for this. But generally the reason for this is a much bigger discrepancy between the southeast region, where we look at London, versus the north of the country. And part of the reason is that the ambitions for the north of England are still set by a government which is based in the south, so mainly based in Westminster. So that means that they probably don't get the same level of ambition though as you get in the Netherlands, where they're interested in the general prosperity overall. So in the north of England, they're definitely very reliant on huge influxes of money coming from the southeast of the country. And because the Netherlands doesn't have that in the same way, you will see that it's more interested in prosperity overall. The difference in attitudes and ambitions can definitely lead to different actions, and you will see how this has greatly influenced the economy in the north of England. So overall, the Netherlands is obviously a much, much smaller country. So in that way, you can't compare it. And that's why I said that's why I looked at the north of the England versus the Netherlands itself. But you will see there's much more local influence and power in terms of the Netherlands, which allows these regions to thrive. So the UK government, if you then look at in contrast, they have cancelled really exciting tram and metro building projects, but also think of the recent commotion that they had around H2S, where they cancelled the line going from Manchester, which could have really given the economy the boost that it needs. So even if you go to the small Dutch cities, for instance, I'm a small city in the south, you will see this is very well connected to other places in the Netherlands. For instance, for me, it's really easy to go to Rotterdam, which is one of the big hubs, but even going to Schiphol, for instance, if I want to catch a flight. So the surprising thing here, if I want to take a train, I will need to change somewhere, and the next train is just 2 minutes difference between the two trains, and all I just need to do is walk to the other side of the platform. So that type of connectivity certainly wouldn't be possible in the UK, and it only runs between two really big cities. So even if you look into contacts of some of the biggest cities in the north, such as Leeds and Manchester, you will see they're far behind the Dutch major UK cities. You will see it's not just the cities where you've got the problem. However, this blog post is not just all doom and gloom, and obviously I live in the north of England, and I do see very many exciting projects going ahead too, especially because I work in universities in terms of regional centres. So you will see there's more of a hub developing in this area that spans across big cities such as Manchester, Liverpool and Leeds. But what it kind of says at the end of the blog post, which I did quite like, is they say there's no reason why they can't achieve the same as the Netherlands, but it seems to be a lack of ambition. And obviously, this is a very interesting time ahead because there will be elections soon, and we'll see what will happen to the next government and how they will look at this region in the north and how they will invest in it to make sure it can reach its full potential. And one of the things I would look forward to is someone who really enjoys, well, normally traveling by public transport, but knowing this is incredibly expensive in the UK because you're reliant on private companies. There's been lots of strikes this year. I think only 70% of the trains run on time, which is quite low. It really would be a big move to go towards a public system again. But we'll see what will happen, and hopefully, as me living in Manchester, I hope there will be more investments in the region. Do have a look at my playlist Touchy in the UK, where I compare certain things in terms of both countries, see how they're similar, how they're different in terms of, for instance, food and how they celebrate certain things. Thanks for watching.